What is up, YouTube? It is Aaron back here with the channel. I'm here with a very special guest today. Introduce yourself to us, my friend.
Hi, I'm Aditya. I am last year's NAWCQ champion and this year's NAWCQ finalist. I attended Worlds for the past 2 years, and I have topped quite a few YCSs in my short Yu-Gi-Oh career so far.
Yeah, so I would say one of the best players in North America without a doubt. He was first in the points playoff standings after the past 2 years. Obviously, a lot of success at the WCQ, and now we're going to go over his process of how we prepare for Worlds together. This is going to be episode 1 of the Competitive Edge, where we are discussing how you get better as a player. We're going to start off with like how we analyze beginnings of formats and the deck building process that we went through and some of the changes that we went over the course of. So first things first, we're gonna talk about what Worlds format was, and then we're gonna get into like some of the differences with TCG and how we identified those, narrowing down the deck we went into, and then how we like kind of solidified the list as we went. So first things first, narrowing down the format. It is very similar to the TCG format. There's obviously some key differences. Paradise Smasher being the primary one. Some small changes other than that. Alice has one less Dormouse. Ice Rizal, or sorry, Ice X and Sorter at one. And then just overall, is like some small changes, but in general, very similar to TCG format. So what we've been playing in Justice Hunters was very comparable to what we're playing at Worlds. And we were able to use a lot of that testing uh, as we moved over into Worlds format. So obviously Mitsurugi is not legal, but we narrowed down the format to like the 5 of the 6 primary decks in TCG. We have Crystron, Vanquish, Yummy, Draco Tail, and Malice. And then for rogue decks for the tournament, we obviously identified White Forest because Dino from Australia was playing it. I also identified Lunalight because of some OCG testing results and just like our gameplay with the deck. Like obviously, Library is a fantastic card, performed well at WCQ, and had no reason why it wouldn't translate over to Worlds. And yeah, so obviously we have identified some of these differences, and now we're going to get into like how did we narrow down the deck into where we ended up. So obviously we have like these 5, somewhat 6 decks. Aditya, kind of tell us how you went about that process, what things you were looking at in the decks, and why you ended up on the decision.
So the way that we kind of started our testing was to just look at all the decks that were playable. And essentially just try to build skeletons out of each one and try to see like which one is like favored into the field, or like which ones are like the most powerful, which have the most agency going first and second. That's kind of how we decided to end up on Canine VS, because it has the most agency if you have to go second because of the turn zero capabilities. But we also looked at the idea of playing cards that say like you don't have to do anything on turn zero. You just play breakers like Malice or Yummy. Breaker Yummy was one of the biggest decks that we had in our lineup. I think that was the deck that we would have played if not K9 VS, just because of how powerful the breakers were in this format. I know that the list right now, Super Poly is at 2.
Yes,
Um,
good call out.
but yeah, but this is like what we had originally. That third Super Poly is just probably something else. Probably like Harpies, or maybe like a one of Dark Ruler or something. I don't know.
So why did
Uh,
you move? So I guess the big question is, when in a TCG, we've definitely prioritized the hand traps. Why did you think in the Worlds format the breakers would have performed?
Breakers were good. Sorry, no, I shouldn't say good, but they were probably better into the Worlds format because they didn't have cards that just skip turns, essentially, like Paradise Smashers, like we do have in the TCG. It's also a format without decks like Mitsurugi, so the overall turn zero that most decks can put up isn't super uninteractive, meaning that most board breakers or most board breaker type approaches will work really well. I think the biggest exception to that is probably Lunalight, unless you were siding into Kaijus or Lava Golem or something, or like siding into specific outs to that deck, which we probably would have considered in the overall scheme of things if we decided to go with a breaker approach.
Yeah, this is definitely one of our earlier iterations of the deck. Maybe like towards the end, this was like what we were considering. I'm definitely just like a big proponent of like hand traps are the primary way. And also you discussed agency, which is something that people may not be super familiar with. So the concept is just like whenever you are like entering a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, first, second, game one, post side, you want to have the most available options in your deck to either it's mainly just like your engine's ability to either like make things happen either through interactions like a deck like Mitsurugi. Like if you're not getting Joel and Lockbirded, you're playing through a lot of like those one-off hand traps pretty consistently. And then going second, when you go against every deck that doesn't play Impulse and just go like Mitsurugi Ritual, Summon Rakumo, you're in a really strong position like off of your first action. So agency is just like how many plays does your deck have and how resilient is it through interaction. So when I look at the Yummy deck, and this is kind of just like what a lot of high non-engine count decks do, they generally struggle in terms of agency because like especially with this deck pre-Marshmallow, you don't have too many extenders. You have like obviously some spell cards, but on average you have like one normal summon. Maybe surprised if you're able to open a Cupsy, and then if you're able to get interacted with, I think it's a pretty big struggle to like push the game forward. And because you didn't play hand traps, now you have to draw a specific combination of 1 to 2 breakers. Obviously you have like some trap hand traps, but as you pointed out, they may not be as needed or strong in the format. So this is my big reason as to why I wasn't the biggest fan of the Yummy deck. I think if we were to play a Breaker deck, I would have preferred the Malice deck, just because when we discuss agency, this deck has a lot of options. Obviously, Lancia can be an issue, but like I said, like with the one-off hand traps, the Veilers, even a card like Nibiru, like this deck has a lot of ability to push through all of that. So, and obviously that was the deck that you performed at the WCQ with. You got able to get second. It was a deck that you played over the course of last year a fair bit. So, what deterred you from playing this deck at the Worlds after having so much success with it over the past 6 months?
I guess the biggest thing that deterred me with it is that I personally think the deck is actually phenomenal. I think it's really, really good. But we did recognize that Lancia is still kind of it is a really tough card to push through, as well as the deck now with one Dormouse and also only one Allure of Darkness, so we can't really make up for that lost consistency outside of like playing the Sky Striker cards. But the Sky Striker cards alone don't technically allow you to play the game, quote unquote. There are some really, really cool combos that you can do with Engage plus backup, like backup dump another one, and then you can make Haggard Lizardos and conserve your what's it called? You can conserve your second activation of Hornet Drones as well. So there are some really, really cool and really, really good lines with the deck. I just was not confident entering a tournament like this with a not so high consistency,
Yeah.
which
Uh,
unironically I bricked a lot with the deck that I played. So
yeah. I mean, so yeah, that is an issue. Like you said, like so consistency can be a problem with both Malice and Vanquish Soul. And when we started looking into Vanquish Soul, you can identify okay, like maybe some marginal consistency problems. Malice has that same thing, but it also has like the super super high roll going second, which Malice doesn't have. Like obviously you have like the breakers, you have like your impulses, which the card's fantastic. But in terms of just like the overall going second power of the Malice deck, it isn't like the most potent. It is able to make pushes, but it kind of relies on like those non-engine forcing half boards. And the breakers are like good, but like if they're able to layer their interrupts through it in the forms of a Vanquishful Trap or the quick play spell, obviously having Holy Stew in hand. There's so many different layers that those decks can, or that specifically the Vanquishful deck can interrupt Malice through even breakers to prevent it from happening. And obviously it has like the even stronger going second power of Holy Stew and obviously Azuna. So I think that is why we kind of lean towards it. This was another build that we had. It was more hand trap focused. I think breakers were probably the way to go if you were not playing Vanquishful, just because the Yummy deck was a deck that was obviously very known. And this is like one of the primary ways to beat it, to just like activate good spell cards into the deck. And especially when the Yummy deck is on breakers itself, you're not as concerned about the hand traps. The back row isn't super impactful against a deck like Malice, like Droplets and Songs of the Dominator. Not like the most impactful card. I think
yeah,
breakers
and
were
one
a good
of
decision.
the
Sorry, sorry, good.
and I think one of the biggest things that like one of the biggest takeaways with this deck is that with the breaker deck is that because Canine Vanquish Soul is your hardest matchup, cards like Izuna or Holy Sue, you almost every single time when you open the Sky Striker engine plus a mouse name, you will always find a way to like out the Izuna before you activate something from the hand. Just because like you're always going like if you say you have like engage plus any name, you always go for red ransom to search the mouse in the mirror before you like commit to anything else out of your hand. So like that's my reason as to why I think the Sky Striker version is the better version to play. I think one of the biggest issues is that into decks like Yummy, it did not perform incredibly well.
And they may have been a combination of the non-engine choices that we had in the deck at the time. Like maybe if there's a super poly in this list, like the deck performs a little bit better. Obviously, you're making extra deck sacrifices, but it's a card that performs really well into it. And then again, like if Luna Light was a deck that we were all aware of it, we weren't sure how many to expect. It was obviously a number between like 0 and maybe like 2 or 3. That's a deck that we have some non-engine for, but in general, like the breaker strategy doesn't perform well into it. And then obviously like the Vanquish whole deck, it's able to layer its interactions very well, so breakers aren't the most consistent way to prevent that deck from playing. So yeah, we will get into Vanquish now, which was the deck that we ended up playing. Obviously, the winner ended up playing it. There were 2 slots of it in the top 8, and I think it was like a third of the tournament Swiss overall. We were under the impression it was going to be a little bit higher just because of high rolling ability of the deck. Obviously, consistency like can be a bit of a problem, but in general, I think it's like a pretty strong deck. So this was our starting point. I think this is I'm just gonna kind of like skim through a lot of the ideas that we had, and then as we get closer to Worlds, we'll have like a better idea of where we ended up. So this was draft 1, just like kind of really copied off of last format. 6 chummies, still Drolls on the side. Obviously, Lancey Respect Malice, Nibiru, good card, Phantasmite, good card. We kind of identified these pretty early, just because obviously a dark monster. But we just kind of like copied OCG list and then kind of went there. And then draft 2, I think, is a little bit more like getting the so we added Bestials in, and then we tried siding the Canine cards because Steven Santoli was able to convince me that hey, these cards actually don't perform too well as like engine extenders, and he's correct. Is 100% true. And we also were looking at our main deck and had 6 chummies, so we're like, okay, we need to put 6 cards in consistently. How do we do that? So we just side the Canine cards and we put in these 5 plus tactics, or obviously we have trolls and shifters as well. So we have a lot of different options in terms of how to make our deck work going first. And then from there, we came back to the problem like, okay, consistency is a problem. So this is when we started putting extravagance in the deck. So yeah, extravagance with Phantasma and Crows. The list that I ended up playing at the regional, which was I think end of February, was something like this, where we identified Nib and Phantasma as good cards. Still playing the Bestials, just because obviously TCG, but like I wanted to see how well Magnuma and Druid Swarm perform in the field. We tried cards like Vados. If I remember correctly, I played Kurikara too, or I think I was testing it around this time. So we had Pankratops for Yummy. Vados is a card we wanted to test. Be like, okay, if we cut off Minion, how often do we die against the Yummy deck? Obviously, Shifter. Protoss is like a cool going second card. Eventually, we tried cards like Escados to the search off of Magnamut and like Meows, so we could just like turbo into the Protoss, the Arch Nemesis cards against Yummy. See if that was a viable win condition. So yeah, we had a lot of different ideas. So Aditya, this is I think similar to the list that you played at the regional. What differences did you have, and like where were you at towards the beginning of where we're at in the test?
So for that regional, this is where we had taken like a split approach. So this is where you had tested playing Extrav in the main. I had tested playing the higher canine count in the main.
Okay.
With like more Jokels and the Lantern. I don't remember if I was playing the Forced Release or not, but this is also where we kind of discovered that Saryuja was a viable it was a viable like pseudo bridge from the canine cards into the Vanquish cards, because that was the way that if we open like an all canine hand or say like Jokel plus Azuna, we would always be able to get to Saryuja to draw 4.
Yeah, and that
Which would
was
yeah.
sorry, you're good.
No, I mean like it would just bridge us, like it would bridge our way into one of our 3 Rosins or 3 Mad Loves.
Yeah, so that was something that was brought up to me towards the beginning of the format by a friend, and I was like, this seems silly. What the hell? And then obviously like I saw other people doing it and discussing it, and I'm like, okay, probably should listen to him. So shout out Mitchell for that, much appreciated. He got it from the OCG, but like it usually takes me like hearing it a couple of times to be like, okay, this actually makes sense. So yeah, we saw Saryuja and we're like, okay, this kind of like helps bridge the idea. So Extravagance was obviously a card that we liked. You're making some sacrifices in terms of Nash Knight, how many rocks you're gonna have. Like our cards like Zeus and Typhon gonna be required for you to win the game. And we came to the conclusion that Extravagance was good, but it's at 2 in the world's list, which affects it a little bit. So we would end up on 2 Extrav and Prosperity if we viewed that as necessary. And now we're getting more in towards like the full canine package and like the Vanquish stuff. So I think this is a list that we were testing for a while. A lot of like the future stuff is just gonna be like side deck adjustments. So they tell us from where we were with extravagance how we got to where we are now.
So this is where we had tried. We really liked the canine cards, and we thought they were really really good. But we wanted like another way to increase our consistency post size, so that we just always drew a playable hand no matter what. So we had an idea. Shout out to Nick for coming up with the idea to side into Extrav instead of maining it, because realistically, when you're going second, the spell cards just suck. They're really really bad to see in your opening hand. You always want to just see attributes as much as you can. So we also came up with the siding patterns, not at this point, a little bit later, where we would start siding down on our spells. So we would side out cards like Snow Devil, we'd side out Pross, we'd side out once, most of the time siding out two Stake Your Souls, because again, it's not a card you want to draw in multiples. It's not really even a card you want to draw going second. It's a card you probably want to draw off of your chummies, like as push as like another push for your turn. But like that card being in multiples doesn't really do anything for you. You would rather just see other attributes in your deck to turn on your Holly Sue, or just see like more hand traps.
Yeah. I especially once we get to thrust in the deck, it makes an easier justification of I have less stakes, but I have thrust to access stake or prosperity or rota. And then obviously cards like tactics, which we end up in the list as well. So this list gave us versatility because we have like the 4 generic going first cards where we can take out Fua. And then obviously a card like Phantasme or a card like Nibiru if it's bad in the matchup. Valor is a card that I was kind of high on. I had seen a fair amount of lists playing impermanence in the deck. I didn't like that it conflicted with Azuna. And I wanted to like really prioritize. So a Nibiru was a card that we identified as like really really impactful when it was able to resolve. But like obviously you can't always guarantee that result. So I wanted to have a card in the deck that like we can just like always pair with Nibiru, because one thing we recognized was when you're playing the Vanquish Mirror, if you can't nib early because they obviously don't have enough summons, and then by summon 5 there's usually a Ripper on the board, and then later on in the turn, especially if there's like Lupus under it, you can't like Valor early. But by the end of the turn, if you have like Azuna plus Nib, they can always end on like a Mad Love or like get the Caesar in hand. So it's actually pretty unlikely for Azuna plus Nibiru to actually end their turn, or like mitigate their inboard. Like it's, and also half the time, especially if you chummy them, if you droll them, like they half board just like pretty consistently on it, like just for fun, because like their hands are already pretty good. They have their attributes. Why extend when they don't need to? So Nibiru was a card that we identified as very powerful. Obviously against Yummy, it's like okay, but as Yummy players got better and Akroki became more common as like the lead field spell, it became less impactful. So that's when cards like Phantasm were like, okay, this is a more preferred way, because we identified we want to have bodies on board to start our turn against that deck. That way we can force out cards like the book Synchro pretty early without like sacrificing our Vanquish Soul monsters. So yeah, I think we are on the right path, and then over the course of time we just make some changes. Pancratops was a card that I wanted in the list, specifically because of cards like Rivalry and Gozen. Those are 2 cards I just like wanted to avoid auto losing the game to. And this is a card that is kind of generic. You could put it against like Draco Tail, you could play against Yummy. But overall ended up not being delicious because it was not as powerful as something we wanted, and obviously we ended up on something like Thrust. So these lists, I'm just gonna skim through them. They're all relatively similar between like Nibs and Phantasmes in the main. Um, then we have like
These
Valors and
lists
Bells in
were
the
all
UI.
just sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
These lists were all just pretty much adjusting ratios between. We had an idea of what cards we wanted to play
yeah.
in these lists. This is where we kind of started trying cards like Thrust and talents like in the side.
Mhm.
But for the most part, like as for the main deck, we were just trying different ratios to see what would work best.
Yeah. And we I think ended up on 2 Borger, just because we acknowledged in the mirror match having that second Borger is really good. Also, we wanted to make sure our dark count in our list was I think always 9 if I remember correctly. We never wanted to go below 9 because Holy Sue going second needs a dark to be interrupt. So like that is the attribute that is required for that card to function. Then again, like I said, in the mirror it's good. You can side it out going second for more Phantasmes or whatever we had, Bells. So yeah, we had that. We have Lancius to respect deck like Malice and Lunalight, because initially I don't think we were respecting it enough. We realized Bell was very good in the Yummy matchup, so we just prioritized that. And then we were like, okay, Pruly is good into the mirror match. Let's have that in there. We have Niv in the side deck, just like a good going first card, obviously a good going second as well. we just kind of worked it all out. We had Tikaboo in as well. I was back on the Baylor card at one point, and then I think we ended up on this. So this was the final list we ended up playing. Pretty normal in terms of what you'd expect. 41 just because we wanted the last dark in the deck. And I wanted to have the second nib in the list, and I didn't want to commit in the side deck space. So I'm like, okay, we'll just play 41. It doesn't actually affect math super much, I guess. And then we have Lancia to respect both Lunalight and Malice. And then I think there was another deck that it covered, but those are like the two primary ones. Phantasme, obviously, for first, second, Yummy. Bell as well. Third Perulia for the mirror match, and then obviously we have Thrust and Tactics for the cards that we really wanted, what I came to realize, and I'm not sure how your experience was at Worlds, but in general, I felt like Tactics was the only real card that gave you a chance to like break boards going second in the mirror. Obviously, if you were able to like combine a number of hand traps against the mirror, then you were able to like stop them from creating a real board. But when you're playing 5 chummies and you don't really have enough space to draw like multiples of like Valor Nib or whatever other combination, they're most likely going to half board you. And I would rather just like, if I'm playing into a half board, thrust into Tactics or thrust into Stake Your Soul into Reveal an Earth so you summon Caesar, which instantly checks the trap, can force out cards like Ripper or Force Release. I think ended up being like the way to go. Obviously, we have the Sarguja in the extra deck to facilitate the K9 consistency. Like when you're playing against a Breaker Yummy deck, you can now get all the way into your engine if they don't interrupt you. So I'm pretty happy with where the list ended up. Obviously, you had a poor experience. So what changes would you make in hindsight? Are you happy with the prep we did? So yeah, moving forward, what should we do differently?
Realistically, I actually don't think I don't think the deck was bad. I just think it was a bad format for this deck. Even though like Julian's a great player, he built his deck as well, but I don't think this was the deck to play for this format. Considering when you look at the overall spread in Top Cut, the majority of decks that were played were breaker decks. That mostly just because it didn't really matter for the most part what your opponent put up. If you committed all of your non-engine to breakers, you were pretty much able to break almost any board, with the exception being Lunalight.
I think the Vanquishal deck performs pretty well into breakers personally, especially when you're able to have hand traps in addition, like in the form of Bell, which is something we didn't do was play Force Release, which is something you'll notice. Just because, like he said, breakers are generally pretty efficient at clearing back row, or it's like your board. So if a card like Book of Eclipse got activated, I didn't want to have like another dead card on our board or a set. A card like Storm, which is gonna just like wipe all of your back row. Obviously, Werewolf has some benefits. But from our testing and specifically my testing, I felt like the games that I was winning, the X Force release was not like required to win. It was just kind of like an extra piece. And a majority of the games where I lost going first, it involved a card like that, or sorry, the Snow Devil, or Start without a Vanquishal name. Like drawing non-attribute cards, especially ones that are already accessible, that like didn't really like elevate my end board. Didn't feel good, and uh maybe hindsight not the best decision, but like I think it wasn't necessary. And like you said, your losses were majority just like drawing, unfortunately, lack of attributes. Going second, drawing out like too many normal summons, which is just like a problem the deck kind of has naturally. And obviously, we saw two great players, both Shane and Julian, perform well with the deck. Shane unfortunately wasn't able to win in top 8, but he had lines to do so. And Julian obviously was able to win the tournament. So I think the deck obviously very high skill ceiling and power level. But yeah. So what final thoughts do you have? Like, if you were to go back, we've seen the tournament play out. What would you take now? And yeah, give me any final thoughts you have on the.
As for the Vanquish Soul deck, if I were to go back on this format in general, I probably wouldn't have main decked the Perulia, but this is kind of in hindsight. We expected to see a lot more Vanquish Souls, so Perulia was just inherently a better card. I probably would have ended up moving that card to the side and then just playing 3 nibs, calling it 40 cards, and call it a day. But other than that, and what my thoughts earlier with like another deck probably being better, I think Sky Striker Malice or Breaker Yummy, I think those were the best decks of the format.
Assuming that you had, I think the other concern, I guess, like you acknowledge, is Lunalight. that deck obviously performed very well. The two Germans that brought it, one lost in the finals, one had a topping record and didn't make it. So what do you think, if anything, because we were aware that that deck could be in the format, was that just something
Mhm.
that you kind of had to like make a sacrifice for in deck building? Because obviously you saw in one of our earlier lists we had a kaiju. We decided it wasn't worth just like the one kaiju for it. You can't really thrust for an out to it in the form of Heraldry Abyss because the deck will end on Silverhound and Graveyard. So how would you counteract that if you were going to play a breaker deck, knowing that it could be?
So the great thing about playing these breaker decks or playing decks like Malice or Yummy is that you don't ever necessarily need to commit your normal summon. So you would always be able to side an answer for Lunalight in the form of cards like Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, or Kaijus, which inherently just solo the deck on its own. Like you can just let them play, do whatever they want, and then just drop a ball on them. And then you have so many ways to actually start your plays because you still have like 3 Obedience School, you still have the 3 Engage, and same thing for Malice. You still have your Engages, you have Malice Underground, Gold Sark. There's still one Allure of Darkness in the deck. I'm saying there are still ways to play in those decks and ways to side into your outs. I don't think VS K9 is a deck that can really always play those cards. I don't think it can always play Lava Golem because normal summon Rosin or normal summon Mad Love is still really, really important to the deck. And cards like Holly Sue, again, they're dependent on you seeing your attributes as well.
Yeah. So the one thing we did discuss was the Hida into Dogoran. So that was obviously an option if we really valued the matchup. Um, Theoretically, you could play a card like Underworld Goddess. You just like try and go wide with Vanquish rules. If you did that, you'd probably play a card like Dark Charmer or something like that. So I think there are ways to do it. I think it was. I'm not sure if it's an incorrect decision to like not respect the deck as well. Because the deck obviously also has the burn plan of we have 2 Borger in our deck, we have the trap card. Over the course of 5 turns, you can definitely burn them enough to end the game. And you obviously have Masquerade as well, so going first, if they go heavy poly, you're turning off that avenue of their win cost. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you have cards like Shifter as well, you have Lancia, so I agree that it's a deck that we maybe should respect it a little bit more. But at the same time, when you look at Swiss, there's only 2 of them. There's a chance that their Swiss just goes worse, and they end up not performing as well. So at the same, like, obviously you want to be respectful of the field because if you play any of them in Top Cut, you do have to beat them to win the tournament. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, there's no guarantee that they always perform that well every time.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we didn't really respect Lunalight at all. We did have cards in the side deck prepared, not with Lunalight specifically in mind, but as an overall coverage. Like, we were one of the few decks that were playing Lancia on the side still because it was coverage for Malice. We recognized it was coverage for Lunalight as well. That would kind of insulate them to just making one Laggard answer, which is a lot easier to manage than double Laggard.
I agree. So obviously not the result we're looking for. Last year I think you bubbled out, right? We worked on it, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not the performances we're hoping for whenever we prep for Worlds. Obviously, fantastic accomplishment to make their back to back through the same medium, a 3,000 person tournament. We're able to make the finals. So congratulations to you on that. I expect more big things from you in the future. You've mentioned going into the Master Duel grind a little bit. So tell us a little bit about what you're planning on doing over the next over 6 months to a year.
So I am planning on playing a lot more Master Duel than I am the TCG now. I don't plan on attending as many regionals. I'll still probably go to every North American YCS more or less for the social aspect. Obviously, I'm playing to win, but I want to branch out into a different avenue, if anything. So I think Master Duel is going to be my next outlet. I plan on playing all of the DC Cups and the next Master Duel WCQ and kind of upping my Master Duel experience until I can become as good as players like Enzo, like Pac, like Joey, like Ryan, Herman, like all of those guys who have just translated their ability to play from the TCG to Master Duel over not a huge span of time. I think that's something I am seeking.
All right. Well, best of luck to you in that endeavor. Thank you for joining me for episode 1. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see you at Worlds next year, either in the TCG or in Master Duel. I expect big things from you either way, my friend. Thank you for joining me again, and yeah, we'll see you in the next episode.